You know, it's just a handful of words, the kind of thing you might scribble on a piece of paper and stick to the fridge. But what if I told you this simple little note is actually one of the most famous and most debated poems in the entire English language? Yeah, we're about to find out why.
I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet, and so cold.
Right, so what's the big deal? I mean, it sounds like an apology, kinda, a little confession, but there is so much more going on here. And that's the mystery we're going to unpack together. What is really happening with these plums?
All right, so first things first. Let's start with the obvious. Is it really, just a note?
And yeah, on the surface, that's exactly what it is. And honestly, that's the whole point. It's just a tiny snapshot of everyday life. But to really get why this completely mundane moment became high art, well, we need to meet the man who wrote it down.
Because it turns out the author wasn't some lofty poet in an ivory tower thinking about grand abstract ideas. Not even close. This guy was right in the thick of real life.
His name was William Carlos Williams, and get this, he was a full-time pediatrician in New Jersey. I mean, he delivered babies, he made house calls, and he would literally write poems on his prescription pads in between patients. He just had this passionate belief that real poetry wasn't about myths and kings, but that you could find it in the rhythm of ordinary American life, right there on your kitchen counter. And he was part of this artistic movement that fit his philosophy perfectly. It was called Imagism. The rules were really simple. Be direct, use as few words as humanly possible, and focus on the thing itself, not some abstract idea about it. Their motto was, no ideas but in things. So a note about plums in an icebox? For an imagist, that was pure gold.
Now let's zoom out and think about the context. This poem was published in 1934. The world was a grim place. The Great Depression was in full swing. Fascism was on the rise in Europe. So in the face of these huge, dark, global forces, writing a poem about a delicious stolen snack, well, that becomes a quiet little act of rebellion. It's a defense of small, simple human pleasures.
And this brings us right to the poem's emotional core. Because what we have here is a tiny little drama playing out in just a few lines. A drama about some of our most basic human conflicts.
You can see this central tension right away. On one side, you've got pure desire, that Epicurean, live-in-the-moment joy of eating those amazing plums. And on the other, you've got stoic duty. Those plums were part of a plan. They were saved for a practical purpose. And in this tiny battle, impulse just won a small victory over responsibility.
And that brings us to a really crucial point. This isn't a true apology, is it? The speaker isn't saying, I'm so sorry I did it. He's saying, forgive me, because the pleasure was so immense it was basically worth it. It's a calculation, a justification. The joy of the experience nearly cancels out the minor crime.
And psychologically, this little note is just fascinating. It's a perfect example of what we call cognitive dissonance, justifying the wrong by focusing on the pleasure. It's also a repair bid, a way to turn a potential conflict into a moment of closeness. You could even see it as a kind of moral licensing. Confessing the minor sin actually gives you permission to enjoy it.
Okay, so we've looked at the history, the psychology, but for decades readers have sensed there's another layer here, something humming just beneath the surface, something way more charged and intimate.
Let's talk about the plums themselves. In art and literature, fruits, especially soft, round, juicy fruits like plums, have a very long history as metaphors for, well, other things. They're often symbols of flesh, of yielding, of sensuous delight.
And think about the very specific sensory details Williams focuses on. So sweet and so cold. He's describing a tactile experience, cold flesh warming in the mouth. It's an intensely bodily, intimate image that really evokes the contrast of skin and touch. So, is this an apology for a minor theft, or is it maybe a lover's teasing boast after a shared, secret transgression? Suddenly, that line between confession and seduction gets beautifully blurred. The simple act of eating becomes something almost carnal.
And of course, a Freudian reading would have a field day with this. The poem stages that classic battle. The impulsive id says, eat the plums now, while the superego, the voice of the rules, says, wait for breakfast. While the id clearly wins, devouring a forbidden pleasure. And the apology? That's just the superego's little whisper after the fact, a hint of guilt that's too little, too late to undo the satisfaction.
So, after peeling back all of these layers, the historical, the psychological, the erotic, we can finally ask the big question.
Why are we still talking about this fridge note almost a century later?
Because it's the eternal fridge note. We've all been on one side of this equation. We've eaten the leftover pizza, the last piece of cake, the snack someone else was saving. It's so deeply universal that it's become a meme, endlessly adapted and parodied because the feeling it captures, it's just timeless.
And I think this brings us to its most powerful message for us today. Those plums were part of a plan. Breakfast. They were an item on a schedule. Eating them was a small act of sabotage against a future-oriented, optimized world. It's a tiny rebellion against efficiency itself.
Ultimately, the poem becomes this quiet little manifesto. It champions the body's immediate yes over the mind's deferred no. It argues for spontaneous, sensual pleasure. It gives us permission to forgive ourselves for being delightfully, stubbornly human.
So read it again now. It's no longer just a note, is it? It's a historical artifact, a psychological case study, an erotic confession, and a small act of rebellion. All of a sudden, these simple words feel heavy with all that meaning.
And that leaves all of us with a final question. In a world that's always telling us to plan and save and optimize, what delicious, sweet, and cold plum is waiting for you? And are you going to eat it?